speaking of fact-checking, CBS News is fact-checking the president during his address, along with the Democratic response. And for the results, we're going to go ahead now to my colleague, Tanya Rivero.
Right.
Tanya?
Thanks, Elaine. And Gabe Debenedetti is also with me here to break it down. Speaking of the Democratic response, we want to hit on a fact that Stacey Abrams made because it was kind of shocking. She claimed that maternal mortality rates show that mothers, especially black mothers, risk death to give birth. And in a developed country like the U.S., that's a shocking claim. But it turns out the U.S. has the worst rate of maternal deaths of any developed country. And black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related death compared to white women. The CDC says the number of reported pregnancy-related deaths in the U.S. steadily is increasing. So that's pretty alarming. It's
very alarming, and it's actually a statistic that you don't hear a lot from politicians at a national level. But one of the reasons that it really struck me was that it came when Abrams was speaking so soon after President Trump spoke. And there was a passage in his speech when he essentially was saying, look how great things are for women now. So there was a very clear contrast here.
And we want to play that soundbite when the president spoke about how exciting this moment is for women. Let's listen.
All Americans can be proud that we have more women in the workforce than ever before. And exactly 1 century after Congress passed the constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote, we also have more women serving in Congress than at any time before.
So that's true, right? More women in Congress than ever before. They were very excited about that. A lot of women on their feet celebrating. Not the whole picture, though.
Well, first, let's say it's not the whole picture because with the claim that there are more women in the workforce overall, that's true in terms of, overall numbers, raw numbers, not in terms of percentage of the population. Obviously, we have a bigger population than ever before. And on the other hand, it's true that Donald Trump can actually take credit for the fact that there are more women in Congress than ever before. He's not actually going to be happy about that, of course.
Right.
That was
Many
part
of them ran against him and against his policies. So.
Exactly. And you saw this massive moment in the speech, actually, where all these Democratic women dressed in white stood up and applauded that line. They, of course, for the most part, ran against it.
Right. I want to point out, according to our fact checkers, the portion of women who are employed is lower than it was in the previous 2 economic expansions. So technically, even though the number of women in the workforce are bigger, the proportions are not. So the picture for women in the workforce is complicated. It's mixed. It is exciting this year, for sure, in Congress for women. We want to get to another fact. The president spoke about Americans who've been lifted off of food stamps.
Yeah.
And he said that nearly 5 million Americans have been lifted off food stamps. There has been improvement, and it appears that about 3.89 million Americans have been lifted off food stamps, but not quite 5 million.
Right, and this is one of those things where if you're a Republican or if you're one of President Trump's colleagues or allies here, you're sort of like, why are you, lying about this? Because you're just going to get fact-checked on it. It's still obviously moving in the direction that he wants.
Absolutely. And one other thing that we want to touch on, and we have a soundbite to go with this, is something that the president loves to talk about when it comes to border security and his wall. The number of Americans who are killed by drugs. Of course, the opioid crisis is sort of separate from his demand for border security, but it is still part of the big picture when it comes to drugs and drug deaths. Let's listen.
Tens of thousands of innocent Americans are killed by lethal drugs that cross our border and flood into our cities, including meth, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl.
So we were talking to Kate Smith about this, who's done a lot of fabulous reporting on exactly how illegal drugs get across borders into the U.S. And in most cases, especially in the case of fentanyl and cocaine, they're often found at legal ports of entry.
Right. And we've seen this actually in recent weeks with some pretty big busts. And one of the big reasons that this is such a tough political issue right now is that, of course, many people are saying on both sides of the aisle, well, we do need to crack down on drugs coming over the border. But the idea where the rubber hits the road here, that there should be a wall and that is actually going to stop it, is basically not based out in the facts of how this is actually coming over.
Right.
So,
and people in those areas are thirsty for policies that are effective, but not necessarily the wall.
Right. And that's why when you see Democrats and Republicans not in the White House sitting down to try and talk talk about ways to fund border security or to get border security, they're not really talking about a wall. The only person talking about a wall for the most part is the president. What they're talking about is technology and surveillance on the border that would actually stop, massive drug shipments in some cases from coming over. Again, not in areas that are currently unsecured, but through ports of entry that we know about.
Absolutely.